All right, yeah, so this is me. Here's where you can get in touch with me. A little bit of my background. I've been working on a side project with some friends called Hypermodules, and we're building some fun little projects that I'll show you a little bit more later. We're building it in Node.js and Electron and various JavaScript modules. For my day job, I work at a company called Netlify. I just started working there a couple months ago, maybe. There's a ton of Netlify stickers over there. And for those who don't know, it's kind of like GitHub Pages. Who knows what GitHub Pages is? It's a place to host websites for free. We also have a free plan. It's kind of like a combination of GitHub Pages and Travis CI, so you can spin up a short-term VM, build up your assets, and throw it onto a high-performance CDN. So pretty cool, free resource for developers, but it scales up to run businesses on. So check it out if you haven't heard of it. If you have, let me know what you think. So I'm here to talk about Choo 6. Has anybody? I don't expect a lot of people to know about it yet, but has anybody heard of Choo? Ben, all right, cool. Couple people. Yeah, right on. So Choo is a front-end framework. It's written by a guy named Joshua Waits. I don't even know how to say his last name, but he's in Berlin. It's kind of similar to React. Chances are, if you make money writing JavaScript these days, you probably write some React. Anybody write React here? That's what I do for my day job. So I love React. React is how I make my living. It's a great choice for projects and teams because it's so well established. But I don't know about you, but I have some complaints about React. It has a, and then so I just want to preface all these statements and jokes that I have the utmost respect for React and its ecosystem, and everyone uses it. I love React. I use it. But let's break it down. What is React? It's a front-end framework. Has a lot of features that make it interesting and useful. Let's go through some of them. Pure function front-end templates. So in theory, you have this JavaScript object that you smash into a JavaScript function, and it renders into a DOM component on your web page. That's a really non-scientific, non-engineering way of explaining it, but that's kind of what it's known for. It also has a stateful component model with life cycle events. You guys all know what this stuff is. I'll just go over it real quick, but just to get the concepts out there so we're all on the same page, just in case somebody doesn't know what this stuff is. It's really important, like when your web components are mounted in the page, that certain things happen when they're added or removed. We can all agree on that. This was kind of its claim to fame, efficient DOM diffing between renders. So you would kind of assume that your template's rendered in a purely functional way every time, and then you would have this special machine that efficiently diff patched the changes onto your web page. Because to just remove and redo all of those DOM nodes, especially if there's thousands of them, every render cycle is not very efficient. If anyone's tried to, like, for example, render a really long list or something and then update it later. Had a lot of other crazy things like synthetic events. The DOM is a crappy API, and handling events is a pain in the ass. So synthetic events sort of helped. It's a performance. It's a way of it's a performance. It helps with performance, but it also makes it a lot easier to handle events on the DOM. So a lot of other things. Synthetic style properties, automagic component traversal, something immutable. If anyone's worked on a React project, in theory, the parts of the tree of your view, when data changes, only the parts that need to be updated are updated. But in practice, I've found, from my own experience and the people I talk to, that a lot of times, unless you're like really conscious about what you're doing, and your team is as well, that doesn't always happen. So JSX, Babel, Webpack, Redux, Flow, etc. I don't know if this number is exactly correct. I Googled it last night. I didn't actually run a test on it, but it says if it's 360 kilobytes. I don't know. Is that right? Doesn't really matter. React is pretty big for what it does. So what else did I miss? Any other major features of React that I missed? Anyone? Virtual DOM. I didn't even say that one. Yeah, so it models a DOM and then does its stuff with that. So the React game, in theory, so this is kind of like what you end up dealing with when you're using React day to day. So you have to make a decision how you want to store your top-level app data. In practice, usually this means Redux. Anyone use Redux? A lot of people use Redux, yeah. So Redux is pretty cool. Another thing you need to do is you need to decide how do you want to route between views. And in practice, this usually means React router. So yeah, you actually do your routing with XML tags via JSX. So the next, in my experience, a lot of times you end up learning a lot of fancy words like hawks, reducer, action creator, transducer, middleware, a lot of things that kind of like don't translate to other sort of application architectures. For me, this kind of frustrates because it makes it difficult to communicate with other developers. Even though I understand the value of it, it's just sometimes it just seems like a lot just to give a name to a particular pattern. So you have to decide how you're going to pass or connect app state down as props. You have to get your action handlers into your components in various ways. In Redux, you use the connect function, for example. And then I threw this one in here last night. Thought I was being clever, but that one-off API layer that the one person on your team wrote didn't document. I don't know if that's a familiar experience for other people, but it's a common pattern that I've found. So. How you're going to style your app. Are you going to use, for a while, the React community was promoting inline styles, and it's kind of since gone into a weird various versions of prefixed class, component classes and things like that. So, or you could just go for your classic style guide and class convention that people used to do 5 or 10 years ago. So, and then the last part is you get paid because there's a lot of React jobs out there. So React was a game changer. There's a lot of really good ideas in all of that. The fact of the matter is, like, you have a state component, or you have a state object at the top of your app, and you call a render function, or it's called for you automatically, and your views update based on the state of your app. I mean, that was really difficult to do for a long time. And it matured a lot of really good ideas. It came with a lot of baggage. There's a lot of things in here that I think if we were to try to pull the core value out of React and try to redo it in a way that does away with the ideas that aren't necessary to its core use. I think we can come up with something more interesting. And I think that's so for example, here's an example of what I think is a little bit of baggage. So JSX was always touted as an optional feature of React, but in practice, it's not really optional. Like, how many people use React without JSX? Not very many people. That's because it's not very practical. And so, wow, you cannot see that, but. So, this guy was complaining on Twitter one night, said, I really wish React people would stop saying you can use it without JSX. You can, but you can also stir boiling soup with your bare hand. Redux and other overly complex state management systems are not optional in practice. You have to, not that many projects, or at least it's very common for projects to choose something like Redux without really considering what they're bringing on board, or whether or not the conventions of that system are actually advantageous to the productivity of their team. I like to say the cake is a lie in this case. A lot of times the time travel and the hot module reloading doesn't work very well, and a lot of teams, most average teams, struggle to get much value out of it. Feel free to contest any of this. Keeping Babel and your team's bike-shedded ESLint, post-CSS, Webpack loader, whatever the fuck pipeline dependencies working up to date is decent job security. So it's not my idea of fun, but it has got to be done. And in the front-end world of today, that's just part of the job. So hopefully I didn't offend anyone. This is all meant to be in jest. So it's I kind of look at let's get to Choo now. So I kind of think of Choo as the good parts according to my taste. So not just mine, but a number of people around the internet and around the world. So there's a famous quote that I found on Lifehacker last night when I was putting the slide deck together. It says, "Perfection is achieved not when there's nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away." You all have heard that before. I don't know who said it. Here's another quote that I liked. These are just kind of to give you a vibe of like where I'm coming from. So Dominic Tarr, he's an old school Node.js hacker, and one of his sort of like philosophies about writing software is software performance is losing weight, not building muscles. So let's talk about Choo. Choo was written by Joshua Waits. Actually, I don't know how to say his last name, but there's this guy right here. Let's compare what Choo does to React. It's very similar, but does away a lot of ideas and adds a few of its own. So it still gives you pure function front-end templates. So you take a state object, you throw it into a template, you click render, or not click render, but you call render, and it puts it on the DOM. So you can update your app. It has a stateful component model with lifecycle events. So you can add things to the page, run code when that happens, and then run code when it is removed, for example. And it offers efficient DOM diffing between renders. It gets rid of a lot of things. It doesn't use a virtual DOM. It works with real DOM nodes. So there's a DOM diffing algorithm that works by traversing real DOM trees. So it can shed off a lot of weight there. Gets rid of synthetic events, synthetic style properties, the automatic state comparison, the sort of shallow compare, immutable stuff, and doesn't require any transpilation because it's just JavaScript. It doesn't use any JSX. It uses template strings instead. And it's only 4 kilobytes in size, and it's been shrinking over the last few releases. So it works really well on mobile. It loads really fast, and yeah. So what does it do? So it does pure function rendering with everything in Choo is modular. The actual framework itself is kind of just a little bit of glue code around a bunch of modules. So here are sort of the core modules that sort of make things happen. So the first one, we're going to go through each API real quickly, but the first one is Bell, written by this guy on Twitter, Kyle Robinson, sometimes known as Shama. It's kind of like JSX, but rather than having a transpilation step on your code, you just wrap all your HTML in tag template literals. So you don't actually have to like write sort of pretend JavaScript. You're actually writing JavaScript that runs in any JavaScript system that supports tag templates, which is mostly all places now these days. The other thing is a stateful component model with lifecycle events with nano component. That's the part I wrote. Yay! Efficient DOM diffing between renders, nanomorph. So this one's really cool. You take 2 DOM trees, and you can take one and morph it onto the other. So what that allows you to do is generate a new DOM tree and morph it onto the page. Really simple. API, super handy, enables all of this. A router, front-end router for basically taking the URL in the browser and turning it into a function call. Nano query for handling query strings, state management with nanobus, and 60 frames per second cooperative interleaving. So that's basically browser async. If you ever want to do any sort of computationally intensive task on the front end, you can't really do that without causing your front end, your single-threaded front end render loop freezing up. So basically, what you do that is you break up your sort of computationally intensive task into manageable chunks that can happen below the sort of 60 frames per second threshold, and then just sort of kick those off and request the animation frames. And so the thing that does that helps you do that is called nanoref. So that was a really poor explanation of that. Sorry about that. Okay, so the only assumption with all of this is that it's commonJS runtime, e.g. Node.js, browserify, or electron. It also works with Webpack and Babel, and ES whatever version you want. Throw in whatever transpilation steps you want. It works. But the key here is that you don't need that if you don't want it. Whereas with React, it's kind of required. So that's Choo, basically. That's kind of the high-level overview. And so what does it look like? Nobody can see that, so I'm going to zoom in again. All right, so we'll just go through this real quick. Pretty simple. You require a couple modules. HTML is just that Bell module I mentioned. It gets packaged in the core Choo framework, but you can use Bell on its own. Wow, sorry about that. This is sort of like the minimal Choo application. You make an instance of an app. You tell it to use a couple things, like this thing called like count store, which is just a function we'll see in just a sec. You set up your first route, main view, and then you mount it in the page. Pretty simple. So here is what the store looks like, that thing we called in the use method. And it's a function that gets two arguments, state and emitter. State is just a JavaScript object that you can assign values to. And emitter is an event emitter. You attach a few listeners to it and that do things and receive values that you will dispatch from your application and modify state from those events. So in this case, increment will add count to state.count. One thing that you get, one of the big differences between React and Choo is that when you modify state, it doesn't automatically render. It's up to you to call the emit.render method on your emitter in a store. And so what that allows you to do is kind of have a little bit more control over the state mutation before you call a render frame. So a view is just a function, and it also gets the same sort of function signature. So you get the state object and emit, at least at the top level. As you write your views sort of more specific to a particular component, you can omit the emitter or shape the state however you want. But in this case, here's an example of a Bell template. So this is just a tag template, right? So you put the name in the function in front of the template literal, and it processes this HTML string into a real DOM node, and it's returned to the calling router, which means it gets mounted in the page when the user is at the slash. So that's sort of your basic hello world Choo app. That's it. Browsers don't have ES modules yet, and this is commonJS still, although you could use ES modules here. So you will have to run this through browserify if you're running it in a browser. But if you run it in Electron, you can just load this straight off disk, which is kind of cool. What was your question? Yeah, so how do you make modules work in the browser? So the classic answer, sort of the old school Node.js answer was browserify, which is kind of nice because its whole philosophy was like, do whatever Node.js does. Webpack is basically browserify, but with all the bells and whistles. So if you wanted to use that instead, you could. As far as I'm aware, Webpack still supports commonJS, so this should work fine with that. But sort of the magic interface, you could use, is everyone familiar with Electron? Anybody not familiar with Electron? Okay, I'll tell you. So Electron is Node.js tinfoil wrapped to a Chromium instance. So what that means is you can write a desktop application as if it were a Chrome application and have access to everything you have access to in Node.js between the main thread and the browser thread. So does that make sense a little bit? Cool, okay. So yeah, it's just modular JS and HTML. Well, at least HTML wrapped in a tag template literal. So here are some of the basic concepts. And one of the things that appeals to me about this whole system is that, so it's really simple. I really think this is a lot less to digest for most people when it comes to learning web applications. I think one of the most difficult things about learning React is just not only learning the command line, but also all of the tools and steps and CLIs and configuration options and hundreds of modules you have to sort of figure out and piece together. And it's a lot to sort of swallow when you're getting started. Like, as a newbie, and just when you want to like screw around and not like set all that stuff up. So it's kind of an alternative to all that whole system. It's super fun. Code is art. Art is fun. If it isn't fun, it's bad art, or at least it's not fun art. So I don't know. I wrote that last night. I had a growler at that point, so this might get a little weird at this point. It even supports server/static rendering. So what you do is you once you have your app state in that like sort of application we looked at before, right? This thing, like if you were to run there, if you were to like put this, you know, app.toString here. You would get a text representation of your app with the given state object, and so you'd pass your state. There's like some arguments there I didn't include, but basically it lets you you can render it on the server, or you could render it to a file on disk, which is pretty cool. I mean, that's kind of like a high level goal for a lot of projects and things. It's like let's get server rendering working. That's kind of cool. So let's go into the API a little bit more. So this is the store and view function signature. So everything gets a state argument and an emit or emitter argument. So Choo state is just an object. It's a mutable object, and it's you can't so the only caveat is that you can't reassign it on the argument, but you can reassign properties on this thing, and basically whenever events happen, you assign properties to the state object. And then when you're ready to render, you just call emit.render. And so if you look back here, you'll notice that the stores, you can have multiple stores, by the way, gets a state and an emitter, and the view gets a state and an emitter. So it's not a very like big API you have to really remember. Everything sort of at the top level has access to the state object and the emitter, and that's kind of sort of like those are the things you kind of juggle. And so the sort of the core philosophy is what is it? State down, actions up. Is that? I think that's right. So the emitter is powered by the module called nanobus, and this is its API. Really simple. You require it. You make an instance of the bus. Choo does this for you. This is the thing that happens internally, but you could use it on its own. And you add event listeners, so whenever the foo event happens, run this function expecting this color argument and do something with it. And here's you calling this foo event with the string blue as the color argument. That's literally what's happening right here. So we've already looked at this like 3 times now. So. But whenever an increment happens, add the count to the state. And so whenever that'll happen every time you click on this button over here. So this is where all the magic happens. Nanomorph. Nanomorph is a module that you can also require. And what you can do is you can create a DOM tree. We're using Bell here, so basically this turns into a real DOM element if you run this in the browser. And you pass in 2 DOM trees into Nanomorph, and Nanomorph turns the first DOM tree into the second DOM tree. Now, the interesting thing about this is that if this DOM tree is mounted in the actual view, it'll turn into this. And so if any of you actually have had to work with the DOM directly without any frameworks, you'll realize like that can be really annoying. Like you either have to like clear it out and add a whole new thing. Nanomorph, what it does is it efficiently walks the DOM and performs updates in every DOM node that requires it, and skips over parts of the tree that don't. So you get that you get the React speed up essentially. You get the diff patching characteristics of React, but you're using real DOM trees. You're not using a virtual DOM. Nanorouter, I just threw this in here so you can see it. It works exactly how you would expect. You specify routes for your application, and you throw in views into these functions, and it renders it basically. So Nano component, this is the component model for Choo. And so this is the thing where you use a lot when you're actually like building the little widgets on your application, like sliders and like lists and searches and stuff like that. And so the way this works It's very similar to React's component model. The methods have slightly different names. For example, instead of a render function, you have a create element function, and it receives whatever arguments that are passed into the render method of the instance of the component. You can kind of read it. If you look at the examples, it'll make sense. But basically, you implement a create element function that returns the DOM node, and you implement an update test that decides whether or not the component needs to be updated based on the data being passed to it. It's kind of a subtle API to describe in depth right now. So it works basically like a React component. And they even work with other frameworks. So there's adapters. So say you don't want to write a React component for some widget everywhere, or a Vue component. You can write it using like regular DOM, like a regular DOM. You can take like the Twitter widget, wrap it in Nano component, and then throw it through a React adapter, and it will work just in React. So it's kind of like a write once, use everywhere type thing. And since you're using just DOM nodes, it's kind of like the lowest common denominator. So it makes sense, but you could do it the other way around too if you wanted. Actually, I don't know if you could do that, but something like that. We have an organization that sort of houses all of these. If you're interested, this is sort of the place to start to check it out. This is the collection of modules and supporting tools that are around it. We have a Choo handbook. Teaches you how to like sort of make a little game where you have crocodiles and lions floating around the screen. This guy is Australian, I think, wrote it, named Lewis, and he did a really good job. It's really thorough. It starts from the ground up. The next sort of step we want to do is sort of do a higher level cookbook for people a little bit more experienced with web development, but it's definitely worth checking out. So yeah, and so this is the organization right here. Choo 6, so one of the reasons they're giving this talk is because let's say it's Thursday? Yeah, so like Tuesday or Wednesday, we did a Choo 6 release, and it's been in the works for quite a few months, and there's a lot of cool things, and so for the couple people who know what Choo is, like here's, read the blog post. Yeah, it sort of goes through and tells you all that stuff that we did. Check it out. But here's the quick rundown. Everything's faster and more stable. Choo 6 includes upgrades to Babel 5, Nanomore 5. This means up to 20 times faster server rendering and 10 times improved browser running speeds. We've also fixed DOM node caching and introduced sibling node reordering. So that's a cool feature. So if anyone has actually played around with DOM diffing algorithms, there's an optimization you can do where so it's like when you put your key property on your React components. It gives enough information to React so that it can reorder it efficiently, rather than having to create new rows every time you render a list. There's some cool tools that came out. So the easiest way to get started with, the biggest gripe I have with React was all that tooling and crap you have to set up at the beginning. And I know nowadays they have this thing called React Create App, and so we have our own version of that. It's called React Create Choo App. Not very original, but it's easy to remember. So it works pretty much as you expect. You can just do npx create Choo app. It's hard to type with one hand. And then you can do like, let's call it hi. We don't have to watch the whole thing, but yeah, it just basically installs a few of the dependencies and sets up your package JSON. And so you can get to a Choo app as fast as you, pretty much, this is probably the fastest way to get started. Although there's not a whole lot of boilerplate, so it's pretty quick to do it by hand anyway. So if you go into the hi app, you can do npm start. And there it is. And so if we were to like, And so the router also works as you expect. We can just go to some random like route, and it will say, oh, 404 not found, and that's all done client side. And when you go back, it renders the main view. So not a very impressive demo, but it works. So go back to the slides. Yeah, so better. What else is new in Choo 6? Better event system, tracing, query strings, current locations, Nano Component 6, and more. And here's the demo of the thing that I build with Choo currently. It's called HyperAmp. It's something I built with my friend named Nate Goldman and a few other people around the internet. It's an Electron app that is a music library. It doesn't do a whole lot yet, but it does sort of it gives you an idea of something what you can get done with Choo fairly easily. So it's something I work on in my spare time, and let's check it out. So so I'll just use the built version, but I can show you the views in a little bit. But basically, it's looks like iTunes version 4, and it this is all built with Choo. It scans your like a folder for music and adds it to a big giant list, and it has shuffle. So that's about it so far. But yeah, you can do stuff like it has search. Is the computer audio working? So yeah. So these speakers suck, but yeah, it plays music as good as iTunes, basically. So I don't know if any of you have tried to make a list with more than 16,000 rows in it, but the web browsers don't like that very much, and so what's hard to tell, which is a good thing, is that every time you scroll more than a few hundred rows, it has to re-render those rows with the new data. So it's doing it's like doing kind of like a by hand DOM recycling scrolling. But what's fun about it is that you get like about 60 frames per second scrolling, which is like, I don't know if you can appreciate that, but it was really easy to do with Choo. So anyway, so that was the HyperAmp demo. We're on IRC. You can come talk to us, ask questions, help you get started. We don't require you to join a new Slack channel. Maybe some people don't want to do that, but yeah. So that's us, and that's the picture of the IRC room. People working on Choo 6 release, and yeah, I'll just finish up with this picture of the train guy.
Yeah, listen to that bell. Oh, take a look at that. Oh my God! Woo! Listen to that horn! Oh my God! Oh, she's beautiful. She is beautiful. Yeah. All right. Oh my. Oh. 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 Oh no! It's a BL2 too. Oh, the SNC 52. Oh my God. Oh, we're gonna watch this. Oh, this is special.
So that's pretty much how I feel about Choo 6. I don't know about you guys, but I felt like that video kind of summed up my fascination with the whole thing. But it is that fun, and you should check it out. And Mark Zuckerberg definitely is a lizard. Like
when you do these live Q&As, some of them are very silly. So we got one. Mark, are the allegations true that you are secretly a lizard?
Yes.
I'm gonna have to go with no on that. I am not a lizard.
It's not true if you deny it. So yeah, quite a few people work on it. We'd love to have more. And yeah, thanks so much, guys. I hope I inspired you to at least look at it. I promise you, it's not a big investment to learn the API or just check it out, and you might realize it's a lot less work to get started using it than you realize. So, thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
I'm gonna be a runner. Sorry.
Is browserify your favorite way to like get a Hello World app going and all that?
I finally I finally had the point in my career recently where I was tasked with upgrading Webpack 1 to Webpack 3. And I don't know if anybody's done that. It's kind of a rite of passage, I think. But yeah, it's just, I prefer it personally. It's like, they're both good tools. Webpack is a well-engineered thing. It's just, it's a grind to stay up to date. I don't know. So I think browserify makes more assumptions about sort of how it works, and I find those fairly workable, so yeah. Anyway, I love you guys. Thanks for coming out. Yeah, like I said, all my gripes for React are mainly just things that sort of inspired some of the changes in this, and I have a lot of love for the React community, and it's what I do for my living. So yeah.